Yes!
I enjoy all avenues of Destiny, even if I spend the majority of my time doing one thing more than anything else. PvE, PvP, and even Gambit have all offered me thousands of hours of entertainment, so there's never been a point in time where I've exclusively stuck to one side. But if I'm being perfectly honest, I don't think anything in Destiny has ever satisfied me as much as the PvE endgame has. Raids, Grandmaster Nightfalls, and even Master Lost Sectors hit different. I can't really explain why, but there's something about challenging activities like these that I just can't get enough of. And if you're watching this video, it's likely that this is the side of the game that you're interested in getting to as well, but you just don't know how to. And it's likely that you don't know how to because you're probably a solo gamer, which means that you don't have any friends to game with and receive guidance from, or you just don't have the correct gear. Or it could be both, but believe it or not, there are thousands of people who play Destiny 2 every day and don't have a single clue about what gear they should be using in the PvE endgame. And when you ask what weapons you should be going for, they might tell you something like Anarchy or Divinity or something along those lines, but that's not helpful at all because in order to obtain weapons like these, you have to raid first, and unless you found a group of incredibly helpful and polite people, or if you're lucky enough to have a bunch of friends to rely on, this isn't a realistic expectation at all. Because most of the time when it comes to being selected to join a raid, a good loadout is your entry pass. And I hate to say it, but the simple aspect of not owning certain weapons is enough for a fire team to tell you that you aren't allowed to join. I've been playing Destiny for years, and I've witnessed countless instances where people would get invited to fire teams to get kicked because they don't have certain weapons. It sucks, but it happens. But it's all good because that's what you have me in this video for. Now, I put together a guide that'll get you raid ready without ever stepping foot in a raid. This means that every weapon and armor suggested in this video is in some way, shape, or form attainable as a solo player and won't give you too hard of a time to get your hands on. This also means that I won't mention a single raid weapon here. I took this route because I wanted everybody who watches this video to know that they have equal access to everything on this list as everybody else. I also won't be saying anything about mods because that'll further the complexity of this video, and if you're a new or returning player, the first thing you need to worry about is getting the best gear before anything else. And be advised that this guide isn't exclusively about getting yourself prepared for raids, because all of the suggestions here also work for other difficult PvE in-game activities such as Grandmaster Nightfalls and Master Lost Sectors that we spoke of earlier. I decided to zero in on raids specifically because raids are more than likely the PvE activity that you'll frequent the most. Look at this as more of a guide on how to become successful in the PvE endgame as a whole, and not just raids. So in this video, I'm gonna show y'all how to become raid ready without raiding. Let's go ahead and get it in. One thing you will need to know is that adhering to one loadout is a horrible habit to have. All in-game PvE activities are different and will require you to switch your weapons and armor up to achieve maximum viability and contribution to the fire team, especially when it comes to raids, because you'll be expected to change around your gear for every encounter if need be. You absolutely need to give yourself options, and I've compiled a list of some of the most viable legendary weapons that are put in work in the PvE endgame. When it comes to primary weapons, you can use whatever you want for the most part, because unlike Destiny 1, all primary weapons for the most part have a fighting chance in PvE, and using whatever you're most comfortable with is the best advice I can give you. Your primary weapon is the workhorse of your loadout and will be mostly used to dispatch rank and file enemies. Primary weapons don't fulfill a DPS role because that's what you have your super, special weapons, and heavy weapons for. So yeah, if you have a favorite pulse rifle, use it. If you like to use sidearms or auto rifles, use those too. Use whatever you enjoy using, but I highly suggest against using two primary weapons. If that's what you like doing, go ahead, but believe me when I say that your fire team members will more than likely get annoyed if you're not able to kill ads quickly enough, for example. Now, there are several inconveniences you'll run into while using a double primary loadout, so I suggest using a primary weapon and a special weapon. Special weapons were designed to take down stronger opponents and will have an easier time dealing with enemies that would take your primary weapon too long to get rid of. Now, it doesn't matter if your primary is in an energy slot or if your special weapon is in a kinetic slot or vice versa either. But yeah, let's take a look at some of the most viable legendary weapons that you will have the most success with in the PvE endgame. Ever since Season 5, new, fully masterwork legendary weapons with static perks will be introduced into the game. There was one for Crucible, one for Vanguard, and one for Gambit, and this trend continued from Seasons 5 to 7. These weapons were known as Pinnacle weapons. Starting in Season 8, Pinnacle weapons were discontinued entirely and were replaced by Ritual weapons. We were given 3 Ritual weapons during Seasons 8 and 9, but for Season 10, we were given a single weapon known as the Point of the Staff from Iron Banner. Starting in Season 12, there will be one brand new Ritual weapon introduced, And at first, I had very low expectations for these weapons until I actually use them myself. At the time this video is going live, we currently have Season 12's Adora Sniper Rifle, Season 13's Salvager Salvo Breech Loaded Grenade Launcher, and Season 14's Rapid Fire Frame Fusion Rifle, Null Composure. I can only speak on the 3 pursuit weapons that we currently have, so if you're watching this video after Season 14, take this as a preemptive recommendation to add any of the new ritual weapons released after the season that this video came out in, because I'm pretty sure they'll be amazing as well. Now, similarly to ritual weapons, pursuit weapons have 4 trait perks that can be switched around to your liking. Adora is great because it has the perk known as Vorpal Weapon, one of the most sought after perks for boss damage, because it increases weapon damage by about 15%. If you decide to use Adora against bosses, I recommend equipping it with a boss spec mod to increase its damage dealt to bosses by another 7%. I don't ever suggest using sniper rifles against bosses unless the boss is stationary and or has a big crit spot, because missing shots is one of the most likely occurrences when using a sniper rifle for boss damage. Salvager Salvo quickly became one of my favorite special weapons in the game. As of presently, it's the only breech loaded grenade launcher that has the chain reaction perk. And as the name of this perk entails, enemies defeated by Salvager Salvo's munitions will explode and chain arc damage to nearby enemies. Salvager Salvo is one of the best ad clearing special weapons in the game, and its ambitious assassin perk will load a second grenade into the magazine after every kill. And it ain't too shabby against bosses either. This grenade launcher has a spike grenades perk, a perk that increases damage of grenades that strike opponents directly. This perk provides a 15% damage increase, but again, the damage bonus only happens when the grenades hit the target dead on. Null Composure completely surprised me when I found out how powerful it is. First off, this is a rapid fire frame fusion rifle, an archetype that nobody knew the potential of until Null Composure came out in Season 14. This weapon comes with Feeding Frenzy, a perk that grants reload speed bonuses based on the number of enemies defeated before reloading. It maxes out at 5 stacks, so after killing 5 enemies with this weapon, it will reload lightning fast. It also has Reservoir Burst, which works very similarly to Chain Reaction, but only works when Null Composure's magazine is full. Now, if you decide to use this weapon against bosses, you'll want to swap from Reservoir Burst to High Impact Reserves for some extra damage. Ever since they were buffed in PvE some time ago, Slug Shotguns have become one of the most popular weapon archetypes to use against bosses. As of presently, the only Slug Shotguns obtainable outside of raids consist of the Blasphemer, Bone Chiller, Sojourner's Tale, and the First In Last Out. All of these weapons are solid options, but unfortunately Blasphemer is the only one of the 4 that can't roll auto-loading holster. So during boss damage phases, you'll have to manually reload it unless you're playing as a hunter, whereas you will be able to dodge the reload instead. You'll commonly see many people running a Slug Shotgun in the kinetic slot and in the energy slot and rapidly swapping between them during boss damage phases. This technique is known as quick swapping, and it's rumored that this exploit might be patched sometime soon, so there's some likelihood that it'll no longer be possible by the time you're watching this video. Oh, and one more thing before I move on. You have to own the Shadowkeep expansion in order to obtain Blasphemer, Beyond Light to obtain Bone Chiller, and the Season 14 pass for Sojourner's Tale. Luckily, the best shotgun of these 4, First In Last Out, is available to all players despite if you own any of the DLC or not. Now, every time I've obtained this weapon, it was either from the Gunsmith or various other random drops. In Season 14, we were given a breech loaded grenade launcher that sits in the kinetic slot known as the Ignition Code. Now, you will need the Season 14 pass to obtain this weapon, and as of presently, it's the only breech loaded grenade launcher capable of rolling Slide Shot. Now, if you weren't already aware, Slide Shot partially reloads a weapon's magazine after sliding, but has a cooldown of about 2 seconds or so. I'm not sure, but it isn't possible to repeatedly slide to reload. However, since Ignition Code can only have 1 round in its magazine at a time, it'll always fully reload after sliding, and there's no cooldown for it. So if you have an Ignition Code with Slide Shot, you would literally never have to manually reload. It can also roll Vorpal Weapon in the second slot, so this is the perk combination I would recommend if you ever decide to go for an Ignition Code. I imagine that we'll get other breech loaded grenade launchers with Slide Shot in their perk pool as well, so if this ends up happening, I would recommend that weapon or those weapons as well. The heavy slot is home to your hardest hitting weapons. The weapons located here will be your main damage dealers against bosses, and it's important to mention that the majority of the time, it'll be an exotic weapon that you will be using for the most adequate boss DPS. But there's a handful of legendary weapons I have in mind that'll get the job done without an issue. Now, whether you're using one of the weapons I suggested or not, make sure that all of your weapons in this slot are equipped with either a major or boss spec mod depending on the activity. Every little bit of damage matters, and you don't want to miss out on any damage at all, even if it's a 7-something% increase. I find myself using grenade launchers from the rapid fire frame archetype quite frequently. I enjoy this grenade launcher archetype the most because it has the fastest fire rate of all legendary grenade launchers at 150 RPM. This enables them to unload their entire magazine in the blink of an eye, and via its rapid fire frame intrinsic perk, your weapon will reload faster when the magazine is empty. As of presently, there are a total of 3 rapid fire frame grenade launchers capable of random rolls and aren't sunset. My personal favorite, the Outrageous Fortune, Behringer's Memory, and the Iron Banner Swarm of the Raven. Outrageous Fortune and Behringer's Memory drop randomly from the general loot pool, meaning that any instance where you would receive a random legendary reward, is always possible that one of these weapons can drop at that point in time. A Swarm of the Raven was reissued in the game during Season 11, but I'm not entirely sure if it's still available. For one, I don't play Iron Banner much, and even if I did, I probably wouldn't even be able to attain a Swarm of the Raven because the Iron Banner loot pool is so huge. Targeting one weapon from the entire Iron Banner loot pool is a very unfun experience. So if anybody watching this video can confirm that Swarm is still dropping, please let me know in the comment section. When it comes to grenade launchers, there are only 3 things that really matter. Number 1, spike grenades. Number 2, high velocity. Number 3, auto-loading holster, if possible. Wait, no, it's 4 things. And number 4, low blast radius. I'll explain. I spoke on spike grenades earlier when I brought up the Salvager Salvo, and things are exactly the same here with the heavy grenade launchers. That 15% extra damage will make a huge difference. So if you obtain one of these grenade launchers without spike grenades, save yourself the time and just dismantle it and go for a new one. You'll want high velocity because grenade launcher projectiles have travel time, and more velocity equals faster travel time. Honestly, if your grenade launcher of choice doesn't have a high velocity stat, it isn't a deal breaker, so don't worry about it too much. I recommend it to keep your grenade launcher's blast radius lower because a low blast radius stat means that your weapon's damage will be prioritized by its projectiles instead of the explosions. You want the projectiles to be dealing the most damage, not the explosions, because if not, then you aren't taking full advantage of spike grenades. And you'll want the auto-loading holster perk for the most obvious reasons. During damage phases, you'll empty out the entire magazine of your weapon, switch over to your special weapon, cast your super or something else, then you will switch back to your heavy weapon and repeat the process. Auto-loading holster reloads your weapon when stowed, and it only takes about 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds to proc. Even with the increased reload speed from the rapid fire frame intrinsic perk, manually reloading is always less ideal than automatically reloading in every scenario. Oh, and if you obtain a grenade launcher with all of the most ideal perks, masterwork and all, and it doesn't have auto-loading holster, I would still suggest keeping it. I had an amazingly rolled Outrageous Fortune that didn't have auto-loading holster and it performed just fine. Of course, I ended up replacing it the moment that I got one with auto-loading holster though. This perk is present in the first trait slot of Swarm of the Raven and Outrageous Fortune, but it's present in the second trait slot of Behringer's Memory. However, Behringer's Memory has access to Pulse Monitor in its first slot. Without knowing the capabilities of this perk, you would probably overlook it, but I want to let you in on the secret. In certain scenarios, this perk provides better automatic reloading capabilities than auto-loading holster itself. I'll explain. So Pulse Monitor states that it'll reload your weapon from the reserves when the user hits critical health, right? Well, there's a little trick you can do. If you're within the confines of a Well of Radiance during a boss DPS phase, and let's be real, 99% of the time you will be, you'll want to fire the last round in Behringer's Memory's magazine at your feet to damage yourself. In almost every instance where I've done this, my health would drop to red and Pulse Monitor would proc and reload my weapon for me. And the healing capabilities of Well of Radiance activate quickly, so you don't have to worry about dying. So if you're able to get into the rhythm of dumping a few rounds into the boss, then firing the final round at your feet, you will never have to worry about reloading. Everybody should have a sword in their loadout. And when it comes to legendary swords, the Void Damage Vortex Frame Sword, known as Fallen Guillotine, will be more than worth your time. This weapon is a part of the general loot pool and can drop from any source where random legendary gear can drop. When this sword stepped onto the scene back in Season 11, it was all the rage because of how powerful it was. Some time ago it received a nerf to reduce its damage output, but it's still very strong post-nerf. Vortex Frame Swords are special because their heavy attack is a Whirlwind Slash. Now this attack is more powerful if executed while your sword energy is full, and if executed while the sword's energy meter is still charging, the vortex will be less apparent, indicating the loss of damage. For the best results damage wise, you'll want the following perks. For the Blaze column, Jagged Edge is usually the most recommended because it provides the best damage output. However, your sword ammo is cut by around 20 if you choose this route. The second best option will be Honed Edge. Honed Edge provides half of the extra damage that Jagged Edge would inflict without the ammo reduction penalty. I honestly don't believe that the guard column matters too much, but I personally went with Swordmaster's Guard for the faster sword meter charge rate. But if I'm being honest, the perks that matter the most are the trait perks. And for the best possible results, you'll want Relentless Strikes in the first trait slot and Whirlwind Blade in the second trait slot. Relentless Strikes grants a small amount of ammo after 3 consecutive light attacks. And finally, Whirlwind Blade. Rapid sword strikes increase this weapon's damage for a short duration. This perk stacks up to 5 times, and the damage increases by 6% for each subsequent sword strike, 12% for the second strike, 18% for the third, 24% for the fourth, and 30% for the fifth and final strike. The stacks will disappear when you stop dealing damage with a sword or if you guard. Now I wanted to mention that Eternity's Edge is also a vortex frame sword as well, but it doesn't have half of the potential that Fallen Guillotine does, if I'm being honest. First off, it can only be wielded by warlocks, and its perk pool is very, very shallow. And Whirlwind Blade, the most viable damage perk for swords, isn't accessible on Eternity's Edge. Eternity's Edge is a solid weapon as a whole, but if you look at its perk pool, it wasn't made for DPS at all. Linear fusion rifles received a 15% damage buff in Season 14, so now is the perfect time to get your hands on one. Unfortunately, the only linear fusion rifle in the game that has any real potential as a reliable damage dealer will be Season 13's Threaded Needle. There's no need to go over the barrel and battery perks because they matter a lot less and won't make the worlds of difference in your damage output. However, I would say that Accelerated Coils is the best battery. You lose some impact, but the increased rate of fire ends up equating to more DPS in the long run. Also, Enhanced Battery is a waste of a perk for linear fusion rifles because it doesn't increase the weapon's magazine size, and the same also applies to backup mats. So just do yourself a favor and don't use Enhanced Battery on this weapon. In the first trait slot, you'll want either Clown Cartridge, Rapid Hit, Auto-Loading Holster, or Field Prep. Clown Cartridge will always grant at least 2 rounds to the magazine every time you reload. Now there are times when this perk will grant 3 or 4 extra rounds as well, so your total magazine size will never be lower than 6 and never higher than 8. I would have to say that Clown Cartridge is the best option for the first trait slot. Rapid Hit is a solid option since it increases reload speed and stability every time you crit, but your DPS will take a hit if you miss just 1 crit shot. Because if this happens, you'll lose all your Rapid Hit stacks and you'll end up having to manually reload. You already know what Auto-Loading Holster does, but the second best perk in the first column will have to be Field Prep. Field Prep increases ammo reserves, but also grants a huge speed bonus to reloading, stowing, and readying this weapon. In the second trait slot, there's only 2 perks here that matter: Vorpal Weapon and Frenzy. Vorpal Weapon deals 15% extra damage to bosses and vehicles, while Frenzy receives a flat damage bonus of 20%, as well as an increase to reload speed and handling. This perk won't kick in until 12 seconds after you've taken damage or dealt damage to an enemy, and the weapon that has the Frenzy perk can be stowed and the perk will stow proc. For example, you could deal damage with another weapon, and if 12 seconds have passed, switch to the weapon with the Frenzy perk and the buff will be active. However, the Frenzy buff will disappear if you go longer than 5 seconds without taking or dealing damage, so keep that in mind. And as you can see, this weapon is armed to the teeth with viable perks that enables it to put in some serious work. I imagine that Bungie will introduce more linear fusion rifles later on in the game since they were buffed, but at this very moment, Threaded Needle is in a league of its own. You can obtain Threaded Needle from Focus Umbral engrams from Season of the Chosen, but as of presently, it isn't known how this weapon will be obtainable after Season of the Chosen content has been removed from the game. I would suggest using Threaded Needle's perks as reference for what you should want on a linear fusion rifle if more linear fusion rifles have been introduced into the game at the time you're watching this video. Okay, now that we went over some of the most viable legendary weapons in the game, I want to shed some light on some exotic armor you will want to get your hands on as well. Let's go. At this point in time in Destiny 2's lifespan, there are many options when it comes to exotic armor. However, only some of them make the cut for what will qualify as staples for raids and other endgame PvE activities. And with a fine-tooth comb, I went through every exotic armor piece in the game and decided to shed some light on 5 different exotic armor pieces for each of the 3 Guardian classes. I made sure to include the staple exotic armor, but I also threw in a few of my personal favorites. Every exotic armor provides some degree of utility and viability, and knowing when to use the right ones at the right times will vastly improve your contribution to the fire team. Everything on this list is obtainable via random drops, so whenever an exotic engram drops in game, you have a chance of obtaining one of these armor pieces. Every week you can visit Xur and purchase his exotic engram for 97 legendary shards, but you're limited to purchasing this engram once per week per account, but you're granted a second opportunity if you own an exotic cipher. A quest to obtain an exotic cipher is given by Xur every week as well, so don't miss out on the opportunity to complete it so you can eventually collect all the exotics. Now let me educate you on some of the most viable exotic armor in the game to aid you in becoming raid ready without raiding. And we're gonna kick things off with the Warlock class, my main Guardian class of choice. But with all that out the way, let's go ahead and get it in. Chaos Reach has always and will always be one of the best options for boss damage. This super gained its reputation from its ability to make mince meat out of Gambit bosses when it first came out back in the Forsaken expansion, and released alongside the super were the exotic Warlock boots known as Geomag Stabilizers. These boots are so integral to the Chaos Reach super, it's rare that I'll ever use Chaos Reach without them. It's almost like a symbiotic relationship. Anyways, Geomag's perk is known as Close Enough, a perk that grants an increase to the duration of the super provided that you're dealing damage. With the ability to cancel your super part way and save some super energy for later, combined with amazing damage output, in my experience there's hardly ever an instance where Chaos Reach isn't useful. And even if you aren't using a super on a boss, Chaos Reach is amazing for taking out bulky major rank enemies as well as ad waves. I don't usually use Phoenix Protocol in raids, but it's one of the best Warlock exotics to use in Grandmaster Nightfalls and other PvE endgame activities where super usage and uptime is paramount. Via its Battle Hearth perk, all kills and assists made within your Well of Radiance will return a lot more super energy back to you. Now before Beyond Light release, at least one Well of Radiance Warlock rocking Phoenix Protocol was considered to be mandatory for the Reckoning activity because of the overwhelming ad waves and lack of cover. Well of Radiance itself is amazing because it grants a 25% damage bonus and healing to anyone within it, but the added benefit of gaining increased super energy from every kill and assist from Phoenix Protocol is nothing short of amazing. I've always loved Starfire Protocol but could never justify using it all the time because as amazing as his exotic perk is, I could never find an instance where it was always useful, for me at least. But now that the Vault of Glass raid has made its return to Destiny 2, this is my go-to Warlock exotic armor piece. Starfire Protocol's exotic perk is known as Fusion Hardness, and it's basically a 3-in-1 special. You'll gain a second Fusion Grenade charge, and Fusion Grenades recharge from Empowered Weapon damage. Notice that it says Empowered Weapon damage, but it doesn't specifically state that it has to be your Empowered Weapon damage. This means that when your allies are dealing damage, they'll be generating grenade energy for you. You and your allies are considered to be empowered if standing within a Well of Radiance or Empowering Rift, and if your allies are under the effects of the Blessing of Sky buff provided by the exotic hand cannon Lumina, for example. All the aforementioned creates a nice little synergistic package and procs the Attunement of Grace perk known as Benevolent Dawn, which grants energy to all of your abilities when you heal or empower allies. This means that you're getting your grenades back even faster, and ever since I figured all of this out, Starfire Protocol became one of my favorite Warlock exotics for PvE in Destiny 2. Crown of Tempests will turn you into a one-person ad slaying machine. Its Conduction Times perk will grant steady energy returns to your arc abilities. This includes your super energy as well. So anytime you kill an enemy with a grenade, charge melee, or your super, you're building stacks of Conduction Times, which stacks up to 3 times. It lasts for 6 seconds, but it refreshes every time you get an arc ability kill. Crown of Tempest can be used with any of the 3 Stormcaller skill trees, but I've come to find out that Attunement of Conduction provides the best results, mostly because of Chain Lightning and Arc Web. Both of these abilities cause electricity to chain from one enemy to another, but Chain Lightning provides this benefit for melee attacks, while Arc Web does the same thing for grenade damage. I will only suggest using Crown of Tempest for instances where there's a lot of ads because a Stormcaller super doesn't deal the best damage to bosses, or it doesn't really deal good damage to bosses at all if I'm being blatantly honest. And last but not least for the Warlock class, we have the Lunafaction Boots. This was the most used Warlock exotic when it came to every boss encounter in the game, all the way up until Season 8. Back then, Lunafaction Boots would instantly reload the weapons of anybody standing within the Wearer's Rift or Well of Radiance. This exotic single-handedly trivialized the entire PvE endgame, and its auto-reloading capabilities were swapped in favor of Outlaw-style reload speeds instead. And despite the fact that these boots are nowhere as good as they once were, the benefit of rapid reload speeds is still amazing. On top of that, Lunafaction Boots doubles the range of all weapons, and this works amazingly for those who use Slug Shotguns against bosses. Titans, you're up next. Let's kick things off with the Armamentarium. Armamentarium was my favorite Titan exotic in Destiny 1, and back then, you would never see my Titan without it. You could say that this exotic perk is a bit mundane in the sense that it only grants a second grenade charge, but the main thing to take away from this is the fact that this exotic is subclass indiscriminate. So it doesn't matter what subclass you're running, you will always have a second grenade. The Titan class has some of the best grenades in the game, magnetic grenades being one of the most viable. Each magnetic grenade explodes twice, and during raids you'll more than likely be using Top Tree Sentinel for Water Dawn anyway, so this is always the route that I take. If you decide to go with Middle Tree Sentinel, you'll be happy to know that the Controlled Demolition perk is one of the most powerful abilities in the game. When enemies are afflicted by your void damage abilities, A void detonator attaches to him and explodes when shot, but any subsequent void damage from these detonators will plant more detonators on enemies, chaining void damage explosions. So, the 2 explosions from a single magnetic grenade could clear an entire ad wave by itself. This is one of the most satisfying things to see when playing as a Titan. And during boss DPS phases, I'm always in the habit of throwing my grenade at the boss for a tad bit of extra damage, which is a common practice during the fight against the Void of Glass Raid's final boss, Actium. So if you have the Armamentarium, don't sleep on it just because it grants a second grenade charge, because no matter how or when, an extra grenade is always useful. No differently than Armamentarium, Helm of Saint-14 was a Titan exotic that I enjoyed using a lot based on cosmetics alone. Its exotic perk Starless Night states that enemies that enter your Ward of Dawn are blinded, while allies that pass through it gain an overshield, and guarding with Sentinel Shield blinds nearby enemies. I'll break it down. So, if you're using Top Tree Sentinel, you'll have access to the Ward of Dawn. This is an alternative version of the regular Sentinel Shield Super that conveys a bubble of protective void light. Now, instead of tapping a button or buttons depending on how your controller or keyboard is set up to activate your super, you would hold said buttons instead. It's a common mistake to forget to hold, because if you don't, you'll accidentally cast Sentinel Shield instead. But anyways, while standing within the Ward of Dawn, you'll become as durable as steel, thanks to the Armor of Light ability. Keep in mind the Armor of Light is only active when you're standing inside of the bubble, and its benefits will vanish the second you step out of it. However, when you step out of the Ward of Dawn, you will receive the benefit of Weapons of Light, an ability that increases the damage of your weapons by 30%. Then again, you would still have Weapons of Light whether you're inside or outside of the bubble, but since you can't shoot through the bubble, Weapons of Light won't really benefit you until you step out of it. Now, all of the aforementioned benefits are without Helm of Saint-14, but with Helm of Saint-14, you'll also gain an overshield when you're outside of the bubble, and you can refresh the overshield simply by passing through the bubble again. This ability is known as Blessings of Light. On top of that, enemies that walk inside of your bubble become blinded and move incredibly slow. This benefit is also present during the Sentinel Shield's guard as well. So with Helm of Saint-14, you have access to Weapons of Light, Armor of Light, and Blessings of Light, and I'll tell you right now that your fire team will love you if you're running this exotic. Usually the Warlock on your fire team will be using Well of Radiance, which provides healing benefits anyways, but in the situations where your fire team doesn't have a Warlock, Blessings of Light is nothing short of amazing. Remember earlier when I said that Lunafaction Boots used to automatically reload all weapons before being nerfed? Well, the Titan's Actium War Rig does the same exact thing, except only for auto rifles and machine guns. Now, in order to get the most benefit out of this, I would suggest running an auto rifle and a machine gun. Your auto rifle will be used against red bar adds, and your machine gun will be used against tankier enemies such as champions, majors, and boss DPS phases. The exotic machine gun known as Xenophage is one of the most popular boss melting weapons in the game, and the Actium War Rig fully brandishes its potential because it completely bypasses the necessity to reload. This is amazing because Xenophage has an incredibly slow reload speed, and having to reload in the middle of a boss damage phase always sucks. Ursa Furiosa is one of the most viable Titan exotics for Grandmaster Nightfalls and works very similarly to the Warlock's Phoenix Protocol. His exotic per Ursine Guard states that you'll move faster while guarding with the Sentinel Shield, and guarded damage is converted into super energy when the super ends. In Grandmaster Nightfalls, enemies hit very, very hard. And Ursa Furiosa provides the peace of mind of knowing that you're safe provided that you're standing behind a Titan who cast it. Even though all three of the Sentinel subclass skill trees are compatible with the Ursa Furiosas, the true potential of these exotic gauntlets is brandished if used in conjunction with Banner Shield, belonging to Code of the Commander, also known as Middle Tree Sentinel. Banner Shield is wider than the regular Sentinel Shield that top and bottom Tree Sentinel have access to, and it provides Weapons of Light for that 30% extra weapon damage. And unlike Ward of Dawn, it's entirely possible for allies to shoot through the Banner Shield. So not only would you be protecting your allies from incoming fire, they're dealing extra damage, and you receive a ton of super energy after your super ends. I wanted to note that you have to stay alive in order to receive the refunded super energy. If you die before your super ends, you're out of luck, so keep that in mind. Now, this isn't an exotic that I ever use on my Titan, but I would be delusional to deny how viable it is. Dunemarchers' exotic perk Linear Actuator states that it increases sprint speed, and sprinting builds up a static charge. After meleeing an enemy, that charge will chain arc damage to nearby enemies. Literally, all you gotta do is sprint around for a couple of seconds to receive a buff referred to as Linear Actuators on the left side of your screen. When you melee an enemy while this buff is active, electricity will chain from that opponent to any other opponent within 20 meters. Now, in Imperial System layman's terms, that's 65 feet. And you wanna know what's even crazier about this perk? There's no actual cooldown for it, and you can reproc it simply by sprinting around again, and it doesn't matter how you melee an opponent. Seriously, your melee can be charged or uncharged. it doesn't make a difference because you'll always get the electric chain in effect. This procs off of Middle Tree Sunbreaker's throwing hammers, shoulder charge, shivering strike, and whatever else counts as a melee ability. Alright hunters, you're up next. Now you'll find out quickly that Celestial Nighthawk is easily one of the most used hunter exotics in the game. Top tree Gunslinger's Golden Gun has 6 rounds and bottom tree has 3, but with Celestial Nighthawk you'll only get 1 shot. But that 1 shot is capable of some insane damage. Now when using Celestial Nighthawk, you'll want to select bottom tree Gunslinger because the line 'em up perk here enables the Golden Gun to crit, which is impossible if you select top tree. Celestial Nighthawk is incredibly easy to use because all you have to do is fire your Golden Gun at an enemy's crit spot to deal some insane damage or end up killing them in 1 shot. And when the Golden Gun round connects, you'll be refunded about 30% of your super energy. Shards of Galanor is another exotic that isn't nearly as powerful as it was after being nerfed, but it's still incredibly strong and viable. Shards of Galanor refunds super energy from Blade Barrage hits and kills, and from what I've seen, this exotic is great for Gambit bosses and a Vault of Glass Raid's final boss, Athian, and with the right loadout, you can easily take a huge chunk out of his HP meter by yourself. Since Athian is such a big target, it's entirely possible to have at least half of your super energy refunded from each Blade Barrage cast. Another staple hunter exotic for in-game PvE activities would be the exotic hunter boots, known as Orpheus Rigs. This is an exotic that's been around since vanilla Destiny 2, and it's been viable ever since it was introduced. Its Uncanny Arrows perk provides ability energy for each enemy tethered by shadow shot anchors. You're probably noticing a trend here. Yeah, this exotic also refunds super energy. You'll get the best results if you go a top tree Night Stalker, but bottom tree Night Stalker is a solid option as well because of the Mobius Quiver perk. Mobius Quiver enables you to fire multiple shadow shot arrows as opposed to the 1 shot that you get with top tree. Shadow shot slows and disorients enemies ensnared by it and inflicts them with a debuff that increases damage dealt to them by about 30%. So this super is just as good against bosses as it is against adds. Shadow Shot doesn't slow and disorient bosses, but the debuff is the only attribute that matters against bosses, to be honest. I don't play my hunter much, but when I do, I'll always have the Dragon Shadow equipped. Admittedly, this is an exotic more tailored to PvP, but outside of boss encounters, this is one of the best hunter exotics for survivability purposes. Its exotic perk is known as Wraith Metal Mail, and it states that when you dodge, all of your weapons are instantly reloaded and you receive an increase to your character's movement and weapon handling for a brief period of time. I don't want to get too detailed with describing what this exotic does because I uploaded a review on it some time ago, so if you're interested in learning everything about the Dragon Shadow, check out the description box for a link to the video. Anyways, but to keep it short, the movement increase applies to your character's sprint speed, walk speed, and stray speed, while the weapon handling bonuses increase the reload speed, swap speed, and ADS speed of your weapons. Since the Dragon Shadow reloads all of your currently equipped weapons, you'll want to swap over to Gambler's Dodge to have your melee energy refunded after dodging near enemies. Marksman's Dodge is basically a watered down version of what the Dragon Shadow does, and by using Gambler's Dodge, you're reloading all of your weapons and refunding all of your melee energy if you dodge next to an opponent, effectively double dipping. Now if you're a new or returning player and the Dragon Shadow just so happens to be one of the hunter exotics that you own, you can easily get away with using it in boss fights because once you unload all your ammo into the boss, all you gotta do is dodge to reload all of them, then do it again. If I'm not mistaken, at 100 mobility, the hunter dodge cooldown is about 11 seconds, I believe, and the Wraith Metal Mail buff lasts about 7.5 seconds. So you'll have the Wraith Metal Mail buff very, very often. It was kind of difficult to pick a 5th hunter exotic that works well in PvE because the majority of the hunter exotics are mostly tailored to PvP, but I've always liked the Raiden Flux. Raiden Flux increases the damage and duration of your Arc Staff super simply by dealing damage with Arc Staff. You'll see the Synapse Junction perk present on the left side of the screen to notify you that the buff is active. Raiden Flux is one of those exotics that works really, really well against ad waves and certain bosses in the game, but I would be careful using it against bosses because they're known for stomping and sending you flying. Well, everybody, that does it for this one. I hope that you found this video useful. Having the right exotic armor makes a huge difference in regards to how effective you are in certain situations. A hunter with Celestial Nighthawk always has a guaranteed method of dealing big damage, no differently than a warlock with Geomag Stabilizers. And a Titan with Actium War Rig will never have to worry about manually reloading auto rifles and machine guns as often. Now that you know all of this, you're officially one step closer to becoming raid ready without raiding. Alright, now that was interesting. Now you will kind of find out that exotic armor is just as unique as it is powerful, and some of them are absolute must-haves for certain raid encounters or other in-game PvE activities. Nonetheless, I suggest using what you like over anything else as long as you're able to contribute to your fire team in any way. But as of now, let's move on to the final section and take a look at some of the best exotic weapons for PvE. Let's go. As a new or returning player, one of your most commonly asked questions will be about which weapons are good, which weapons are the best, or if any of the weapons in your collection are any good. I put together a list of some of, if not all of the most reliable exotic weapons in the game, known best for laying the smackdown on the various bosses in the game. Things here will be split up into 3 parts. The first part will be the best weapons to grab from the Monuments of Lost Light. The second part will be rewards from completing exotic quests. And the final part will be about weapons that randomly drop that you might own and had no idea how viable they are. Figuring out which weapons are worth your exotic slot can be difficult, but I can guarantee that you will be significantly more raid ready and endgame PvE ready after acquiring these weapons. Before you do anything, you'll want to visit a tower and visit the golden statue between the vaults. This is a kiosk known as the Monuments to Lost Lights. This kiosk is home to every past exotic weapon that was only available via quest, the season pass, or a random drop from a raid that's no longer in the game. Since the quests are no longer present in the game, you'll have to do some grinding in order to accumulate the currency to purchase these weapons. The rarest ones to obtain will be the exotic ciphers and ascended shards. Once a week, you can acquire quests from Xur that will reward you an exotic cipher, and ascended shards can be crafted at the gunsmith, but they can also drop from the Trials of Osiris Lighthouse chest, as well as Master and Grandmaster difficulty Nightfall strikes. There's also a section of the Monuments to Lost Light known as Legacy Gear, and here you'll find all of the various pinnacle and ritual weapons from the past. I'm gonna go ahead and say that aside from Felwinter's Lie and the Point of the Stag, all of the weapons here are sunset and can't be infused to present day power levels. If you want to collect these weapons for the sole purpose of doing so, have at it, but I don't suggest burning your hard-earned materials on any of these weapons until you collect the exotic weapons I'm recommending first. Alright, first up, let's take a look at the Eriana's Vow. Eriana's Vow was the exotic weapon from Season 8 Season Pass. This sniper rifle hand cannon hybrid takes special ammo and is also one of the few exotic weapons in the game with an anti-champion mod built into its exotic perk. Eriana's Vow makes short work of barrier champions, and this was my most used weapon in the Grandmaster Nightfalls back in Season 10. And this is most of the reason why I would recommend using Eriana's Vow in the first place. Since Eriana's Vow is classified as a hand cannon, you'll come to find out that ammo for it is plentiful if you'll quit hand cannon ammo finder and hand cannon scavenger mods. No joke. I've done this in the past and was able to run through entire strikes exclusively using Eriana's Vow and never ran out of ammo. And this is one of the only special weapons in the game that could pull this off consistently. You know, I love it when an amazing exotic weapon has an equally amazing catalyst, because the catalyst for Eriana's Vow increases its magazine size by 3 and gives it the same benefits as the auto-loading holster perk. So you'll never have to worry about manually reloading this weapon. Eriana's Vow is easily one of my favorite exotic weapons, and it's one of the most powerful season pass weapons in the game to this day. In order to attain the catalyst for Eriana's Vow, you will have to complete a very long quest known as the Vow. This quest will become available to be picked up from Banshee 44 the moment that you purchase Eriana's Vow from the Monument to Lost Lights. This is a pretty lengthy quest, but the final step will require you to kill a whopping 700 enemies with the Eriana's Vow. Be advised that you have to own the Shadowkeep expansion in order to purchase Eriana's Vow from the Monuments to Lost Light kiosk. From the Season 11 pass, we were given the exotic kinetic breech-loaded grenade launcher, the Witherhoard. The Destiny community took an instant liking to this weapon due to its ability to lock down areas, as well as its similarity to the heavy exotic grenade launcher Anarchy. So much to the point where Witherhoard was always referred to as the mini Anarchy. Witherhoard's exotic perk, Primeval's Torment, leaves blights on the ground that inflict damage over time to enemies within its confines. Its other perk, Break the Bank, inflicts damage over time to a single enemy hit by a direct impact of Witherhoard's projectile, and when the enemy dies, it leaves a blight behind on the ground. Witherhoard performed amazingly in the season it released in, but as far as I'm concerned, it became incredibly popular in Season 14 with the introduction of the Unstoppable Grenade Launcher and Breach and Clear seasonal mods. Its catalyst maxes out its handling stat and grants it the auto-loading holster perk similar to Eriana's Vow, but I've come to find out that the auto-reloading capability of Witherhoard's catalyst is a lot more useful because breech-loaded grenade launchers reload slowly and only have 1 round in the magazine without Ambitious Assassin. Witherhoard's catalyst is obtained via a quest known as the Bank Job, obtained from the gunsmith. This quest will become available the moment that you purchase Witherhoard from the Monument to Lost Lights, and it's pretty lengthy as well, but the final step will require you to kill 400 enemies with the Witherhoard. Next up, let's take a look at the exotic kinetic sniper rifle known as Izanagi's Burden. This weapon was the apex predator of the PvE meta during Season 8 because of how effortlessly it destroyed bosses back then. I would say that this is one of the most deserving weapons to have had the status that it formerly had, because back when it first released in Season 5, Lunafaction Boots provided auto-reloading capabilities and completely trivialized all boss encounters back then. Izanagi's Burden's Hone Edge perk enables you to hold the reload button to combine every round in its 4-round magazine into a single super bullet. And since this perk receives 0 benefit from auto-reloading capabilities, Izanagi's Burden saw little to no use back then. But the moment that the Lunafaction Boots received a nerf, it was impossible to go into a raid without seeing Izanagi's Burden. However, sometime later, Bungie rolled out a nerf to sniper rifles in PvE, At the same time, the Izanagi's received a targeted nerf, and for the most part, its usage in raids decreased. You can still get away with using it against raid bosses, but I would say that it performs best in Grandmaster Nightfalls. One shot from a ×4 honed edge takes a huge bite out of a champion's HP meter, especially if its damage is increased by a buff or debuff. If you have the catalyst for this weapon, you will find that the home edge ×4 deals 20% extra damage. Izanagi's catalyst has a chance of dropping from completing matches of Crucible, Gambit, and Strikes, and will task you to kill 500 enemies in order to complete it. I feel that it's only right for me to share some light on a Destiny 1 OG exotic weapon. Sleeper Simulant was one of the most popular boss busting exotic weapons in Destiny 1 ever since its introduction in the Year 2 Taken King expansion. This weapon fires a single beam of solar energy that can overpenetrate targets and ricochet off of hard surfaces. It maintained its spot in the PvE meta from the point in time it was introduced all the way into the end of Destiny 1. It made its return to Destiny 2 during the Season 3 Warmind DLC, where it continued to wreak havoc. Things got even better for Sleeper Simulant when the Year 2 Forsaken expansion kicked off, because this was the most used weapon in Gambit for invasions. And to no surprise at all, this led to Sleeper receiving a nerf, and you probably know how that goes. Whenever something is nerfed in the Destiny games, it either drops in usage or it's never used again, and unfortunately for the Sleeper, its fate ended up being the latter. However, during Season 14, linear fusion rifles received a buff, and Sleeper itself received a targeted buff, providing it with a spot in the PvE meta again. Sleeper's catalyst is a possible random drop from Nightfall strikes. In order to complete the catalyst, you'll have to kill 300 enemies, and after that, Sleeper's ammo reserves will increase, and its charge time will drop from 1024 to 774. So I would suggest getting this taken care of as quickly as possible, because the charge time difference is literally day and night. Sleeper Simulant has always been one of the most enjoyable exotic heavy weapons I've ever used, so it's good to know that it'll be able to battle with the best of them again. Number 5 is another Destiny 1 OG. Whisper of the Worm is the third iteration of a weapon that was known as the Black Hammer in Destiny 1. The Black Hammer was a solar damage legendary sniper rifle from the Crota's End raid, and the moment that word got around the Destiny community that this weapon was incredibly powerful, it became one of the most reliable DPS weapons in the game at the time. Its signature perk White Nail enabled it to replenish ammo from hammer space after landing 3 consecutive crits. It was possible to completely melt bosses provided that you didn't miss. And get ready for it, drum roll, Black Hammer was eventually nerfed. Going into Year 2 of Destiny 1, this weapon alongside all of the other legendary gear in the game was sunset and couldn't be brought up to Year 2 power levels. However, Black Hammer received a second win as it was repurposed into an exotic sniper rifle known as the Black Spindle. Black Spindle and Black Hammer were literally the same exact weapon, except Black Spindle was exotic. Anyways, it was great news that the Black Hammer returned as an exotic, despite the fact that Black Hammer retained a nerf to White Nail. But that didn't stop this weapon from being used by pretty much everybody in the Destiny community who enjoyed raiding. Now in the third season of Destiny 2, we were given Whisper of the Worm, the enhanced successor of the Black Hammer and the Black Spindle. However, the main difference is that Whisper of the Worm existed in the heavy slot. There was 2 reasons why this was a factor. For one, all weapons that currently take special ammo, for the exception of trace rifles, existed in a heavy slot before the Forsaken expansion release. And number 2, even if this wasn't the case, Whisper was entirely too powerful to be a special weapon. No differently than its D1 predecessors, Whisper of the Worm was a literal monster and put in more than its fair share of work against bosses. This eventually led to the White Nail perk being nerfed the same exact way it was in D1, and afterwards, ammo will be pulled from its reserves instead of out of thin air. Whisper hasn't been present in the PvE meta for quite some time, but I recommended it because it's still incredibly powerful. Sniper rifles are high risk, high reward weapons because if you aren't hitting crits, their damage is very subpar. And it's common knowledge that if a boss has a huge crit spot, you can always get away with using a sniper rifle. Now don't sleep on this weapon because it's still a beast even after being nerfed. And I wanted to mention that Whisper does have a catalyst, but it's currently unobtainable. But the moment that it does become accessible again, I either upload an update video or post an update in the comment section or in the description section of this video. Aside from the 5 exotic kiosk weapons I suggested, there are 3 quest-based exotic weapons that you should definitely get your hands on. Since these weapons are quest-based, you don't have to grind your life away for currency to obtain them. These quests are entirely possible to complete solo, so you're allowed to complete them at your own pace. Once you completed the quest known as the Journey on the Moon, you'll be rewarded with the solar damage exotic machine gun, Xenophage. At first glance, Xenophage may come off as completely unappealing because based on perks alone, it doesn't have any truly unique traits. Rangefinder is a passive perk, so there's that, and its exotic perk, Pyrotoxic Rounds, is basically a better version of the explosive payload perk. The only difference is that Xenophage fires explosions only, and explosions aren't capable of dealing precision damage, so without a debuff, Xenophage will always hit for white numbers. However, you'll be surprised to know that this is one of the most reliable DPS weapons in the game. Xenophage may not be able to crit, but no matter where you shoot the opponent, it deals the same damage all the time. And since explosive rounds are unaffected by damage drop off, you can be in Canada and your opponent can be somewhere in Australia and you will still hit them. Xenophage has a very small skill ceiling, and due to the removal of worrying about hitting a boss's crit spot, since it's completely incapable of dealing precision damage, I would say that any and everybody would enjoy using this weapon for that reason alone. After completing the Shadowkeep campaign, then completing 3 Moon Lost sectors, and handing in the Lunar Spelunker bounty, followed by a fairly lengthy quest on the moon, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow would be the exotic void damage rocket launcher known as Deathbringer. Admittedly, Deathbringer has never been all the rage in PvE, mostly because rocket launchers as a whole have never really had much relevancy in the PvE meta, which is odd because in D1, rocket launchers were one of, if not some of the best weapons to use against bosses. However, Deathbringer isn't a conventional rocket launcher that fires propelled munitions. Its Dark Deliverance perk states that it fires remotely detonated projectiles that are drop void orbs on combatants, and its Dark Descent perk states that the further the void orbs fall, the more powerful of a detonation they cause. This weapon takes an entirely different route that a conventional rocket launcher would take, because instead of firing your weapon directly at opponents, Deathbringer requires you to fire its volley over the opponent's head and rain on them. In Season 14, Deathbringer was given a catalyst that enables the void orbs to reach their full damage potential from a lower descent, meaning that you don't have to release the void orb volley that far above the opponent anymore. So yeah, Deathbringer's catalyst doesn't increase its damage dealt, but it does speed up the process of each volley damaging a target, which is an overall increase of damage per second instead. I found out that Deathbringer is an incredibly fun weapon to use solely due to how different it behaves in comparison to other rocket launchers. In order to attain the catalyst, all you gotta do is complete strikes, matches of Crucible and Gambit, and you'll eventually attain it as a random drop. You have to kill 400 enemies with Deathbringer in order to complete its catalyst. If you thought the swords were fun to use before, you will love them even more after using the Lament. All you gotta do is complete the quest known as Lost Lament from Banshee 44, and its solar damage exotic sword will be the reward. Like Eriana's Vow, the Lament has anti-barrier integrated into its intrinsic perk, and it literally makes mincemeat out of barrier champions. There's a lot going on with the Lament's exotic perk known as Banshee's Wail, so I have to break everything down. The button mapping of your controller or keyboard may be different than mine, but I play on Xbox, so the button I use to rev the blade is the left bumper. Once the blade is revved, you'll see the Banshee's Wail notification on the left side of the screen, and your sword energy will slowly decrease. You have the option between rapid sword slashing for light attacks and a powerful overhead sword slam for a heavy attack, but rapid light attacks will deal some amazing damage and build extra stacks of Banshee's Wail, up to 9. As you damage opponents while your sword is revved, your sword energy will deplete rapidly, and without sword energy, you won't be able to rev the blade at all. Be advised that this weapon's shield piercing capability is only possible if you rev the blade first. Regular, unrevved sword strikes won't do anything against barrier champions. This weapon is the go-to option against Atrax 1, Fallen Exo, the first boss of the Deepstone Crypt raid, and in my experience, it only takes 3 light attacks and a single heavy attack to deal the most adequate damage against Atrax 1. And yeah, an entire fire team of Lament users makes this entire boss encounter a breeze. I want to shed some light on 2 weapons that drop randomly in the game. If you want to make acquisition of these weapons easier, you can visit Xur every Friday and pay 97 legendary shards for an exotic engram, as well as purchasing whatever exotic wares he's currently selling. This exotic engram has a one-time purchase limit per account per week, but if you have an exotic cipher, you can purchase Xur's exotic engram a second time in the same week. All exotic weapons drop one time and one time only, and after you attain all randomly dropped exotic weapons, you will always get exotic armor for your exotic drops. I recommend buying the exotic engram twice a week, as well as everything Xur sells every week, to narrow down the exotic loot pool and increase the likelihood of you obtaining exotics that you're looking for. You might even get lucky and the weapon that Xur sells for the week is the exact one you're looking for. The Prospector has been around since Vanilla Destiny 2, and as a weapon that's been here since the very beginning of the game's life cycle, it definitely has seen some things. The Prospector has always been special because to this day, it's the only fully automatic grenade launch in the game, and it's the only 165 RPM grenade launch in the game, meaning that it's in its own exclusive archetype. The Prospector's exotic perk is known as Excavation, and it states that grenades stick to surfaces and set targets on fire. And when you release the fire button, all live grenades explode at the same time. Luckily, the Prospector does have a catalyst. With it, the Prospector gains an extra 40 points to its blast radius and more ammo reserves. It can be found randomly by completing any strike activity. Kill 500 enemies with the Prospector in order to complete its catalyst. I probably scoured through the entire exotic weapon collection screen for the better half of 2 hours before I finally came to a decision. Aside from the Prospector, the other exotic weapon attained from random drops that I would recommend using is the exotic art damage bow, Trinity Ghoul. Its main perk is known as Lightning Rod, and it states that precision kills grant the next shot lightning chaining capabilities. This means that it's entirely possible to fire an arrow at a wall or the ground and inflict any enemy close to it. This perk will only proc if you defeat an enemy with a precision final blow, but with the Catalyst, this perk will proc from any art damage kill. I emphasize the word any because the source of the art damage that you use to defeat enemies doesn't matter because this perk will always proc. And if you need me to emphasize more, you could kill an enemy with a grenade, melee, super, or any other weapon, provided that the damage dealt was arc, the perk will always proc. Admittedly, Trinity Ghoul never had any true viability until its Catalyst came out, and if it didn't have a Catalyst, I wouldn't personally recommend using it because relying on headshot kills to proc its perk can be a bit tedious. But since this Catalyst has such a high drop rate and or you're pretty much guaranteed to get it, I would say the Trinity Ghoul is an easy choice. The Catalyst for this weapon drops from any Crucible, Strike, or Gambit activity completion. And I also want to mention that this weapon is solely used for ad clear, not boss DPS. Its lightning chaining capabilities will provide you with some of the best ad clear potential in the game, so don't sleep on it. As you can tell, one exotic weapon in your loadout can always make a day and night difference. You could go from dealing several 100,000 points of damage to a boss to millions of points simply by swapping over to an exotic weapon more ideal for the encounter. No differently than exotic armor, the more of a relationship you have with your weapons, the easier it'll be to put together loadouts that work best for you as a player. But yeah, everybody, that does it for this one. I really enjoyed putting this guide together, and I hope that you found some use out of this video. Now, before I wrap everything up, I want to shed some light on some honorable mentions that didn't make it into this video. The rapid fire frame fusion rifle, Cartesian coordinate, and the season 15 ritual weapon, the Ascendancy rocket launcher. The footage used for this video was gathered about a month and some change ago, from the point in time it's being uploaded. This was before Ascendancy existed in the game, and before anybody knew what Cartesian coordinate was capable of. Cartesian coordinate gained a spot in the PvE meta after the Destiny community discovered how powerful rapid fire frame fusion rifles are against bosses and the innumerable instances of Atheon getting melted by Null Composure. Unfortunately, there'll come a point in time where information in this video will become dated. Some of the suggestions here might get nerfed, some might get buffed, and better options will arrive later. So if you're watching this video a long time after it released, use it as a template only and don't adhere too closely to it. If anything, I suggest it underwent a drastic change in performance for the worse. Once again, I hope that this video got you closer to becoming raid ready without raiding. So if you made it through the entire guide and enjoyed what you watch, do me a favor and thumb rest of that like button till it turns blue. And if you're new to my neck of the woods, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and click that bell icon so you don't ever miss a video of the most elite gaming content. But with that being stated, 1LHD is over and out. Y'all take it easy.
Can redeem you and me. Don't you wanna feel something? And oh, I miss loving you, but I need to live my own truth. I wanna feel it all brand new. I found a little something from Miss Angelou. Take the good and hold it near to you, and let go of all the burdens you